And then if we were in person, I would have this poster in front of me, but unfortunately we're in this virtual session, and so I'm just going to show this poster. It just states that extension programs are federally funded. Our programs are open to everyone, and there's a USDA contact if you'd like. You can always ask questions and email us at lwf@unr.edu. Okay, so this Living with Fire virtual series is actually part of 2 campaigns. It's a part of the Nevada and Lake Tahoe Wildfire Awareness Campaign. And so we work with local, state, and federal firefighting agencies, areas that are high fire hazard areas, communities, and University of Nevada Cooperative Extension puts on this awareness campaign. We just want residents to be aware of and prepared for wildfire. So this is what our graphic looks like for the Nevada Wildfire Awareness Campaign. And this is what the Lake Tahoe graphic looks like for the Lake Tahoe Wildfire Awareness Campaign. Okay, so now we're gonna go into the pre-workshop polls. I'm gonna ask Megan if you can start that poll.
Sure.
Thank you. Okay, so we advertised this event to be in the Lake Tahoe area as well as in Nevada, but sometimes we get folks from different states or even from another country. And so if you could just complete this poll and let us know where you live, it helps us to realize who is a part of our audience. Got one person out of the United States. One person from Oregon. There's a second question, and it's just asking your affiliation. And we just want you to choose all that applies to you. Are you a landowner? Are you a homeowner? Are you a renter, a rancher, academic, etc.? So I'm just going to allow a few more seconds because I see that this poll is still populating. I think we're done. Okay, I'm going to share this. So it looks like about 28% of folks are from Nevada, 64% are from California. We have 2% from Montana and 4% from Oregon and 2% from outside of the United States. As far as the affiliation, 20% are landowners, 86%, a majority of attendees are homeowners. We have a person from, that's academic and agency staff and other. Okay, Megan, would you mind sharing the next pre-workshop poll? Okay, so here we have a few questions. We just want to see what your understanding is of defensible space and see if you have implemented any of this around your home. We'd also like to know if you are familiar with any plants that are recommended around your home. So it looks like this poll is still populating. I'm still gonna keep it open. And if you just joined, we're just asking folks to please complete this pre-workshop poll. We just want to see what you have done, what you currently know regarding defensible space, if you're familiar with any plants that are recommended around the home. Okay, it looks like people have done or finished voting. I'm going to share those results. It looks like a majority of the folks have a good understanding of what defensible space is and how to create it. A majority of folks have also implemented defensible space actions around your home. This is great. And then the last question, are you familiar with plants that are recommended? Let's see, looks like a majority of folks say sort of, 41% and 39% say no. So you are in the right place. So knowing that a majority of folks already know a lot about defensible space, that cues me in. I'm not going to focus a lot on defensible space. I'm going to breeze through this little introduction about defensible space. So what is defensible space? It is the area between a home and an oncoming wildfire where the vegetation has been managed to reduce the wildfire threat. It also allows an area where firefighters are able to safely defend the house if a wildfire is present. There are three, so actually the wildfire threat is not the same for every home, and it depends upon three things: weather, so like humidity, winds, temperature. It depends upon topography, so like the steepness of your slope around your home, where the slope is facing, if there is a canyon by you, and fuels. Now, we can't change the weather, and we certainly can't change where your home is built, but we are able to alter the fuel. And so when I say fuels, I mean like naturally occurring vegetation like sagebrush and ornamental plants in the residential landscape. We are only going to be covering those two types of fuels in this presentation. I do have to mention that not all plants are fireproof. There is no fireproof plants, rather. Any plant is going to burn when it's exposed to enough heat for a long period of time. But some plants are harder to ignite. They generate less heat when burning and produce shorter flames than other plants. And so in general, you want to choose plants with high moisture content. So like something that's herbaceous. When I say herbaceous, I mean non-woody. Like this picture right here on the left, we got a picture of irises. You want your plants to be actively growing and green. Another example of an herbaceous plant is like grasses, annual perennial flowers, bulbs, and some ground covers. You want to choose low growing habitat plants. So you want to have shorter plants because they produce shorter flames. And finally, you want to have plants with less flammable chemicals. So evergreen woody plants like juniper or arborvitae, they contain flammable chemicals. They have these volatile oils in them. They also are really dense, and they can keep in dried leaves, dead branchlets, just that kindling that is provided for an ember to come in and then ignite. And when these plants then ignite, they burn really intensely. So we recommend within 30 feet of the home having deciduous trees and shrubs that don't usually have these chemicals. Okay, so like I was saying before, every home has a different wildfire threat. And so these are just general recommendations. So the first 5 feet from your home is called the Ember resistant zone, or zone 0. And actually, let me take a step back. You know what? Different agencies around the nation, in our region, they refer to different zones as different names, but the concepts are still the same. So you don't take more of the concepts to heart of what I'm saying. So in the 0 to 5 foot zone, the ember resistant zone, we want to emphasize non-combustible materials. Want to have decomposed granite, rock, pavers, having things like bricks. Those non-combustible items are great. You want to remove all dead vegetation. It is imperative to remove all dead vegetation. No dried leaves, no pine needles, branches, twigs, no wood mulch. We recommend removing any wood piles next to your house. This is the non-combustible zone. So you don't want to have anything that's going to ignite right next to your house. This area should also include the area under and around your deck. I really like the example of during the fall, there's a lot of winds and leaves will blow up next to your house and pile in the corner. Well, those are areas where embers will pile and ignite too. So it's really, really important to clean out all that dead vegetation, especially underneath your deck. Okay, and in the 5 to 30 area is the 5 foot to 30 foot area, rather, is the lean, clean, and green zone, or zone 1. And so when I say lean, it means that there's a small amount of vegetation present, if any. You want to avoid large mass shrub and tree plantings within 30 feet of the home. You want to ensure appropriate spacing. Consider using boulders or stones or rocks instead of mass plantings. When I say clean, we mean that dead vegetation is routinely removed, and green just means it's well irrigated. It's recommended to have shrubs less than 2 feet at maturity, or just ensure that you have shrubs that are able to be pruned to be less than 2 feet at maturity. You want to plant deciduous trees and ensure that there's a 10-foot separation between canopies of the trees at maturity. And the tree canopy should not be within 10 feet of the home. And then the 30-foot to 100-foot plus zone, I'll explain the plus in a later slide, is called the reduced fuel zone, or zone 2. So you really want to reduce fire spreading and restrict fire movement from the ground into the crowns of the trees. So again, remove the dead vegetation, dead shrubs, dried grass, fallen branches, pine needles. Thin out thick shrubs, twice the height between shrubs. I'll talk about that in depth in a later slide. You want to remove ladder fuels, or the ability for those flames to move from the ground to the tops of the trees. And you would do that by removing or pruning the shrubs under the trees. And depending on the species of the trees, you want to remove the lower branches to the height of at least 10 feet. You want to remove small trees and shrubs from under the canopy. And just as a reminder, you don't want to remove more than 1/3 of the total tree branches. Okay, so I told you earlier that topography plays a factor in your home's wildfire threat. And so when you actually have a steeper slope, you need to provide more defensible space. This little graph helps you just figure out exactly how much defensible space generally you should have around your home. The left column shows the different vegetation type, and the top row is the different types of slopes, if you have any, around your home. So I'm going to use my house as an example. In my 30 to 100 plus feet zone, I have sagebrush and rabbitbrush. So that puts me into the category of shrubs and woodland. And then I have a really steep slope, unfortunately. And so it's about a 40-degree slope. So that would mean that I need to have 200 feet worth of defensible space. Sometimes that 200 feet runs into your neighbor's property. It's not uncommon to ask your neighbor, hey, you know what, is it okay if we do defensible space work into your yard? And you know, neighbors are okay with it. It's really not uncommon. I've heard of it happening. Maybe some of you have really dense shrubs and it looks like this in your 30 to 100 plus zone. And again, we recommend doing twice the height between shrubs. So what does that mean? It means that, let's say that this sagebrush is 2 feet, you multiply that by 2, and you want to ensure that there's 4 feet between shrubs. So you want to ensure that proper spacing between shrubs. Oh, I went too quickly. Okay, so I really wanted to mention this. Every home is different. And so we really recommend that you go get a defensible space inspection from your local fire agency. This is just somebody from the local fire agency will come out, they'll walk your property with you and give you recommendations for defensible space. Some people are concerned because they think if they're going to get a recommendation from a fire agency and they don't do these recommendations, they're going to get fined. No, that's not true in Nevada, at least. And so it's really recommended to do this. If you live in Nevada and need help finding out who to reach out to, you can email us at lwf@unr.edu. The Lake Tahoe residents, you're really lucky. All of the Lake Tahoe fire districts offer free defensible space inspections and free curbside services to residents. Let's see. We do have these publications. The one on the left talks more in depth about defensible space, evacuation. It talks about community protection, so like fuel bricks around your community, access in and out of your community, and home construction. What is recommended to do to build your home with the proper construction materials to reduce the wildfire threat. And then the publication on the right, choosing the right plants, we have that for the Lake Tahoe Basin and for Nevada, Northern Nevada rather. These are just recommended plants to plant within your residential landscaping, the 0 to 30 area. It's on our website, livingwithfire.com and Tahoe livingwithfire.com. Okay, so I'm going to introduce Wendy. I'm going to be the first to admit that I don't have much horticulture knowledge. And whenever I have a question regarding vegetable gardening, defensible space plants, I go to Wendy. She's my go-to. She has been with Extension for a very long time, and I trust and am very appreciative of her knowledge. And so Wendy is a certified arborist, and she is the Extension Plant Diagnostician. So please join me in welcoming Wendy.
Thank you, Jamie. All right, let me go to share my screen. And we're always moving things here. All right, are you seeing the PowerPoint only?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. All right. Well, then good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us. So yes, I have a ton of knowledge about plants. For those of you who are not in Nevada, this presentation is really designed for anyone who lives in colder climates. So I'm going to be talking about plants with a focus of tolerance of negative temperatures to negative 10 to negative 20 is kind of my focus. So Northern California, this is going to work for you, Lake Tahoe, and throughout Nevada, Utah, Idaho, and Montana. So I'm very aware of fire. This is a picture that I took from my backyard. And while it was scary, I was very happy to see them coming because that meant they were hopefully going to stop the fire before it got into our area. So we're looking at Firewise or fire-aware landscaping. And I'm going to focus on a lot of different plants, some that you've heard of, and then I'm going to give you some helpful hints about how you manage these. Because as Jamie said, any plant can burn. And your management is very important, and it'll lessen the likelihood of large ignitions or that being a ladder fuel. So what we're going to cover tonight, and I'm going to go a little fast, you guys, so I apologize, but I've got about 67 slides and we don't have a ton of time, but the nice thing is you will have this presentation for later on. So what I'm going to cover is a little bit about where we live, our focus on our goals, what we're faced with, what history's kind of giving us, what landscapes for Firewise or fire-aware fundamentals are. What are our planting zones? That's very important that you understand not only the plants that you want to have, but will they make it where you live? And then we're going to go over a few perennials, shrubs, and trees, but I am like barely hitting the tip of the iceberg. We'll just be taking some snowflakes off the top of the iceberg. There are so many different plants that you can do. And some of these you'll probably be familiar with, but there's a lot of different cultivars and choices that you can look into that maybe you haven't seen yet. So where we live, it's very diverse. I've been in Northern Nevada and Northern California for over 30 years. As Jamie said, I've worked with Extension for a long time. I've actually been here 21 years now. Very familiar with the area and our growing zones and how our environment is. The threat of wildfire and just fire in general affects everyone because they happen so easily. So no matter if you're in the pines, if you're in the valley floor, or you're out in the desert, there's always considerations, and we need to know where we live and be familiar with how weather conditions may affect us and good plant choices for our home. So defensible space management. If you've got a small home, you might not always be thinking about this, but it still applies. This is a small home in the middle of Reno, but what they've done is actually defensible space. They have a planter area near their home, which is all perennials primarily, that all get cleaned out. They're all well watered. Then they've got a hard space. Then they have their green space with their lawn. And ironically, the tree that you're seeing is a cherry tree, which is considered a very good choice. They have a very high water content, and they're aesthetically beautiful depending on the style you have. They grow differently. In this case, this is actually a very old weeping cherry. So one of the things is sometimes you move into a house and it's beautifully landscaped, or you hire a landscape designer and you're doing things. In most cases, unless you've asked for the landscape to be designed with wildfire or fire awareness in mind, that is not taken into consideration. So when we see this landscape, it's gorgeous, but it was made for aesthetics. It's got diversity, it's got color in spring, summer, and fall, but there wasn't time taken to consider what happens when embers come flying from a wildfire from the Bureau of Land Management land space that's behind it. So we can make modifications, and we want to look at those plants and what we can kind of change out. And Jamie talked about these a little bit, but what we're looking at is we're trying to go with plants that are less flammable or are easily maintained, and we take a lot of the flammability out, especially during the winter months. But that's maintenance. So those are things we want to look at. Fire can happen at any time, and you know that. It could be a car that breaks down and lights on fire and then lights the landscape. Sometimes, it's lightning. Sometimes it's power lines. Sometimes it's a bird. I've been through 5 wildfires where I live, so I'm very familiar. And almost all of them were started by something different. So it's something that we pay attention to. So little changes. You're probably aware of this, but this is just something good for you to see. This was a house I moved into, and first thing I did, they had planted junipers right at the front door, and they were right next to my vents. So that was my priority. I wanted those things out. So the next thing we did, put a chain around them, and we used a chain, but look at how much leaf litter was underneath it. So we had over 6 inches of leaf litter that had to be removed. So it's not just the plant, it's all that dead residue, and maybe you've never seen it, but this happens even in deciduous shrubbery. If you don't clean out the leaves, you still get this buildup. Now, in this case, my other part wanted something evergreen still. So we went with a barberry. It's planted just about 4.5 feet away from where that vent is. It's kind of hard to see, but this is an evergreen. It can be easily maintained. It can be pruned so that it never gets close to the home. And now we've got a better defensible space right near that front door, and still something that's aesthetically pleasing. So when we're looking at our landscapes, and I'm going to show you lots of different pictures. I'm not going to show you a lot of landscapes from other people's homes, but I want to show you this one because there's a lot of elements here that are correct. And then there's some that we would want to modify. It's a beautiful front yard. This is a property. It's got some space. Their deck is enclosed, but then the plants are right up next to it. And one of the things you have to consider is what plants you're choosing. So there's lavender here, there's red twig dogwood, and the one main one that probably shouldn't be used so close is there's actually rosemary. And rosemary has a lot of oils to it, so it shouldn't be so close. But doing the patio area, there's a stone patio, and then they've got a low ground cover, which in this case is a woolly thyme. But then you can see they've got their lawn, they've got more of the shrubbery further out. There are some evergreens that are a little close, but when I took this picture, they were still there, but a windstorm came and took a couple of them out. But each plant is going to be different, and there are tons of plant lists out there, but you have to make good decisions for your area and how you can clean them up and maintain them. So what if this is your landscape? You moved into a subdivision. This is a perfect example of where there's minimal things planted here, but then you see that juniper, just like I showed you earlier. And junipers are just one of those things. They're one of the easiest things to put in a landscape for a landscaper because they don't die very easily. But here, it would be really easy to remove that and put something else that is more aesthetically pleasing and less flammable. And no, I'm not going to talk about junipers all night, I promise. So we want to know the zones, and we've got a lot of people here from different places, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about Northern Nevada, Northern California, but these zones apply to everyone. So this is USDA's zoning map. And one of the things you need to know from a plant perspective, USDA looks at freezing temperatures. USDA does not look at the heat index. So when you're looking at their temperature zones, they now use the AB system, which is the same as Western Sunset Garden Book, which I'm going to show you in a minute. So depending on where you live, they've actually bumped up the Reno, Carson City, Douglas County area, which is below Lake Tahoe, up to a 7. And they've even got Lake Tahoe as a 7, which means you generally don't see temperatures dropping lower than 0. For my preference, because I've lived in the Northern California, Northern Nevada area for so long, I've seen temperatures modify. When people are investing in their landscape, my suggestion is if you're going to spend a lot of money, always make sure plants are hardy to -10 to -20, which puts us in a 6 or a 5 on USDA. Now, there's also plant heat zone maps. Now, those are really important, especially if you live in, say, the Tahoe area, areas of Utah, Montana, Wyoming, even parts of Oregon. You want to see how many actual growing days you're going to have or how long it's going to be warm. And the heat zone map gives you an idea of how many days per year that your temperatures are above 86 degrees. And this is important to know because many plants, especially if you're doing, of course, vegetable gardens, you need to know how long that you're going to have of warmth for fruit to develop. This is Western Sunset Garden Book. And most of you are familiar with Sunset Gardens. Well, the Western Sunset Garden Book is kind of a staple. And what I really like about this, and I want to encourage you to look at, is they look at both the freezing temperatures and they look at the heat index. And for years, what they would do is they would contact local universities and make connections with their horticulturists and ask if these plants still fit in these landscapes, if it had changed. So they didn't just look at statistical data or what the current trends were. They asked horticulturists what was happening in the area. So you're going to see they do a completely different kind of zoning number. Lake Tahoe is at a 2B, and most of Reno and Carson City is considered a 2B. Then you get up into the 2A and 1A. And I'm not going to go through this too much, but this just gives you an idea. If you're really doing research, these are some of the things you want to look at. And plant tags normally use USDA, but if you go on to a website or a catalog, they might make their own zoning map. So you really have got to pay attention to what they're saying. So as I said, Lake Tahoe, a lot of Nevada is considered a 2B. So what you're going to see, the labeling for Western Sunset Garden Book on that is that our average temperatures in the winter are going to drop and be in the 12 to 22 degrees Fahrenheit. But we could see temperatures of -10 to -20. So that's why I say I always focus towards that because I know we see negative temperatures. It might not happen for 2 or 3 years, but if you're going to spend thousands of dollars on a landscape, you want things to be able to make it through those cold temperatures. The plants that are shown below are all appropriate choices. The first one is a peony. The next one is a clematis, daylilies. The next one is a quince, and the next is a rose. So just to show you some of the extremes, brand new home built, minimal landscape. There's only 3 plants in this landscape that we would even recommend. And the others are all highly flammable. Fake turf is extremely flammable. Then you see the junipers, and then you see they actually did, the trees are a beautiful evergreen that doesn't belong there. This is a blue Atlas cedar, and that tree is supposed to get to 50 feet tall with over a 20 to 30 foot spread, and they've planted it within 5 feet of the home. You can tell it's not going to last. So don't assume what you bought is appropriate. Many places when you buy, you're going to put in your landscape. And this is a home at elevation, I think they're at about 5,500 feet. And they had their landscape done in the backyard. They had all sagebrush, they terraced, they made a very defensible space. Their home has a patio that goes all around it, so there's no plants within 10 feet of the home. And then they came out with a little bit of turf. They don't have a family, so they just wanted a little. And then they did different things as far as the plant material they chose. The neat thing about this landscape was they put a sprinkler system in the backyard. So they kind of have a wildflower area, but then it's watered by a sprinkler system. So then when the wildflowers are done, they mow it down, but they can always wet that area to keep it more cool and higher in moisture content, which is very helpful. All right, so let's get into plants. Just because you go to a plant list and it says lavender is a good choice, lavender might be fantastic, but you need to do your research on your lavender. Lavender comes in many different sizes, and the lavender grosso is extremely common, very popular. Again, it's hardy to -10, -20, but it gets over 3.5 feet tall in the right conditions. Now, the lavender on the left that you're seeing, which is the Munstead, which is an old variety. If you know plants, you've probably heard of that one before, but it only gets to about 12 to 18 inches tall. So it's very suitable for being a little bit closer to the home. As far as this plant, though, I will tell you, it is a herbaceous plant, but technically it can become woody. So you do need to watch your location. It doesn't have a lot of leaf litter, but this is not a herbaceous plant that you can prune down to the ground in fall. It still has a mass to it. And I just went to the nursery today and I was told about a new one, Lavandula Royal Velvet. It's hardy to -20 and it reblooms. So I couldn't put it in this presentation because I just learned about it 2 hours ago, but it's one of the few lavenders out there that will put on another set of flowers, which is something you don't see very often. So I'm going to focus a lot on this 0 to 5, and then I'm also going to focus with some shrubs and some trees that you can consider. But one of the things we want to look at, and you've heard about this, is we want this to be a very lean and clean area. If you can, no plants. That's much safer. But when you're starting to look at plants, you want ones that aren't going to leave a lot of leaf litter or have dead material with them. So in this case, they've got a patio area, then they've got a planter bed where they do bulbs and then they do annuals. So it's very clean. Everything gets cleaned up by winter time and you don't have any dead material. So we're going to talk a little bit about bulbs and then we're going to go into the perennials. So for almost anyone, daffodils are tried and true. There's so many colors. Some people think they're boring, but there's so many new varieties out there. And if you live near a wildland area, guess what? You probably have critters. And the great things about daffodils is pretty much nobody wants to eat them or steal them. I'm not going to promote tulips in this talk because I live where there's ground squirrels. And most of you may live where there's ground squirrels. And you can see hundreds of dollars in tulips go away if you don't cage them. They're a great choice for Firewise or fire aware, but the critters steal them. So you lose your investment very quickly. It gets planted in the ditch on the side of the road, or it's somebody else's dinner. Single snowdrops. This is one that's been around for years. There's a lot of different varieties out there. They're doubles. Many people like bulbs that are very low maintenance. They like them to be masses. And with the snowdrops, and the next one I'm going to show you, which is called grape hyacinths or Muscari. Both of these plants are really neat in the fact that they're a bulb that will wander and multiply without you doing anything. They require essentially no maintenance, and they make dense mats. And for the majority of the growing season, they will look evergreen. So they may not flower the entire season, but the neat thing is the snowdrops and the Muscari both give you this lush, dark area that is full of water, and it's very easy to maintain. But as I said, both those plants, the bulbs actually move through the soil as they're growing. So they start not staying in the same place that you want. So you need to be familiar with that. Jamie showed you bearded iris. One of the things that I always want to tell you about bearded iris is they are really fantastic for the flowers. But what's really great about bearded iris is the structure and the color that the leaves actually give you. They don't necessarily have to be cut down in the fall. Many people do, but depending on your environment, these can give you a wonderful backdrop and an evergreen feature, even when it's cold outside. If your environment gets covered with snow, don't worry about it. But I live in an area where there's a lot of dry winters, and it's nice to still see that greenery. Any dead leaves, you trim those off so that you don't have a lot of leaf litter. And then most of the pruning, in my case, and I'm at, what am I at? I'm at about 5,400 feet, 5,500 feet. I do it all in spring. So I have greenery in areas where normally it would be brown because I've kept my bearded iris. They multiply. There's tons of different colors. If green is boring to you, guess what? There's also variegated, and you can blend them in. This is a patch that a friend of mine did, and you can see she's incorporated it with other perennials. There's a rose bush behind. They are the spring bloomers. There are later bloomers. It just depends on the varieties that you're planting. But you can see it's great texture, great colors, low maintenance, very few bugs, and they grow in almost any soil. And there's normally people giving them away for free. This is the variegated I was telling you about. So if you want something a little different, just remember most of the variegateds are going to do more pastel colors in their flowers, so you won't have as much variety. Heights will vary. It just depends what you're looking for. All right, now we're going to start going into some of the different perennials. I just wanted to show you a few bulbs because bulbs are very easy for people. So this is one you might not have seen before. This is a red leaf Mucadenia. It's a perennial, but it's going to die completely back in the wintertime. So you're going to have this beautiful foliage with a little white flower. It does prefer some shade. So if you're up in higher elevation or you have a lot of trees around you, this is one that's going to give you not only texture and form, but a little bit of flower and then incredible fall color. So the red is just very intense. You'll see it on the leaves, depending on how your weather conditions are, for at least a few weeks, sometimes even over a month. But again, this one likes some partial shade. If you live in a full sun area, you'd want to stick these on either the north or the east side of the house. Now, I'm going to focus a little bit on the Stonecrops or the Sedums because these are really good choices. When you hear about plants that have high water content, we know the succulents, they are mainly made up of moisture. But the big thing is you have to look at your succulents. Some of them will stay green. They'll stay full of water throughout the winter. Others are going to dry out and you're going to need to remove that leaf litter and that structure. It'll come back from the root base. So in this case, I'm showing you Purple Emperor, which is the one that you can see that's purple and the flowers are just about to bloom, that pinkish white, and Autumn Joy Sedum. Many different varieties out there. Autumn Joy's been around for a long time. Just depends on your landscape, what color you're looking for. They all bloom primarily a whitish to a pink. There's also variegated. These can get tall and they can grow in absolute full blistering sun and do fine. You will need to remove these when winter comes, because otherwise you're going to have a straw-like structure that is flammable, but they will come right back in the wintertime or in the springtime. So you'll actually see growth right now as our temperatures are warming up, and you'll just see this nice green or purple growth start occurring. This is Sun Sparkler. Now, this is a new variety that's out. This is one of those that's more of a ground cover style, and they don't go completely dormant in the winter. So you're going to still have this succulent, close-knit, very small leaf spreading sedum. They bloom, again, that white to almost an intense pink. And you can see the leaf here. I just bought one today. I was so happy. It's a beautiful color leaf because it's like this bluish green, very tight. The plant itself, even when it blooms, isn't going to get above about 6 inches. So this is really great for areas where you've got rock or it's close to the home because it's low, so it fits there. It's a very high water content. And then the great thing is there's really no dead material to this plant. So guess what? There's no maintenance except to water it and let it spread. So I like options that require less maintenance because most people prefer that too. We all have 10,000 other things to do. This is also commonly called stonecrop, but that's a really big pond right there. There's tons of sedums. I'm going to show you a couple more. So this is Delosperma. This one is called Fire Spinner. It's called Ice Plant. Probably most of you are familiar with Ice Plant, and either you like it or you hate it. And if you've come from Southern California, you may really detest it because many of the ice plants are very thick and they're tall and they grow up over a foot, and that's where all the rats are. Well, not this plant. This plant stays pretty much under 2 inches tall, blooms throughout the summer, beautiful colors. In this case, it's an orange with a purple. Plant does wonderful. And as far as watering, not very much at all. Again, it's just like that sedum I just showed you, very dense. There's no deadheading. It just keeps spreading out as long as there's moisture in the soil. Low maintenance plant does fantastic. And these are hardy. So this is USDA hardiness zone 5. So remember, that's -10 to -20. So they're a great choice. Now, if they do have snow sitting on them for too long, you may see some die out. But if the root system makes it through the winter, you'll see them come back up. There are lots of colors. Many of you may be familiar with just the hardy yellow, which was around for decades. But basically, plant breeders have been working with these and creating more and more. So I'm showing you Delmara, which is an orange. I don't have that where it's growing in a landscape where I can really show you. So I took a picture at a nursery. You can see it's a little different in its leaf texture, but again, full of moisture. And then Table Mountain. So Table Mountain, again, spreading. And the color of this flower kind of goes back and forth between this purple to intense pink. And the color changes as the intensity of the light and the flower fades. Very easy, great in spreading environments, low maintenance, but they shouldn't be walked on. Let me clarify that. They are a succulent, so if you step on them, you will crush the leaf tissue. Hens and chicks, or chicken hen, it depends how people call them. Great choices for the landscape. Again, very low maintenance. They multiply by having what they call pups. They put out new plants to the side. They've become extremely popular. So there's a ton of choices out there. Typically, people are not buying these for the flower, although they can flower. It's more that year-round, beautiful color, diversity. You can see there's blue grays to reds to almost like blacks. And then, of course, you know, people want a different splash of color, so they're doing lime greens. Full sun, but they can grow with some shade. But these guys can handle that intense heat. And if you're doing DG or you're doing rock, they can handle the environment. And the nice thing is, if you put them in pots or other places, you can give these guys away and your neighbors really like you. All right, I'm going to mention just a couple of ground covers. This one has been around for a long, long time. This is called the Chameleon Plant. So there's two different ones that I'm showing you here. I'm showing you one that is a variegated and one that's a solid. They both bloom a white flower. They're not really known for the showiness of their flowers. What they are known for is their ability to spread. Now, these will start coming up pretty much last month, depending on where you live. They can be considered a nuisance. So if you're looking at ground covers, just know these can be invasive. They like to spread wherever there's moisture. They will get taller, and I screwed up the height there. Well, that's about right. 6 inches to about 1.5 feet. Depending if you fertilize them, it will get taller. But the diversity with this plant is fantastic. We use this plant at a demonstration garden, and what we do is we plant bulbs and then we put this ground cover in. So when the bulbs were finished, the ground cover took over, and then everything disappears when fall came. It dies back and it comes back from the root system. So we had a very clean area. But when spring comes, we have bulbs popping up. As the bulbs finish, the ground cover's coming up. And then we had summer bulbs that came up later. So all we really had to do was trim out the dead material from the flowering bulbs. And then in the late fall, we just cleaned up the dead material from the chameleon plant. This is called sand strawberry. There's a couple different ones. A lot of people use strawberries as a ground cover. Again, high moisture content, very low on the woody content, but this plant doesn't get much above maybe 3 inches to 6 inches. This is different than a typical strawberry plant. These are ornamental, and rarely are you really going to get fruit off of them. You'll basically be feeding the wildlife. But they do very well in porous soils, low nutrient range. As long as you've got moisture, they'll spread out. Again, these will be evergreen to a point depending on where you live. Otherwise, they'll kind of die back and then they'll come back from the root system. But a lot of people are looking for things that give them green, give them color. You're either going to have a white flower or you're going to have a bright pink flower. And this is a landscape. It's almost at 6,000 feet. You can see there's weeds coming up in it. That's always something you're going to have to kind of deal with. But this is a very established, large area where they just didn't want dirt, but they wanted something to cover it that had low flammability. Grows in full sun to partial sun. No maintenance except for when you start getting weeds growing into them. This is Hypericum or St. Johnswort. Now, this is a ground cover style. This is not the shrub. And remember, you know, depending on where you are, one of the things I did not list in this is we've got people from all different states. Now, some of these plants in certain areas will get labeled as noxious. So you always need to check that. When I say they become a nuisance and they're a spreader, if you go to another state, they may be extremely aggressive and it might not be appropriate because like Hypericum, some of the Hypericums are considered noxious weeds back east, but they have a lot more moisture and better soils. So they flourish. In this case, this is a ground cover, does a yellow flower. This is not the one that you would be using for herbs. This is completely an ornamental. It will die back in the winter. And then you will have to do a little bit of pruning on this because it can become woody, especially when people fertilize it. It'll grow more aggressively. But it's a low maintenance plant, a little bit of pruning in the fall to clean it up. Otherwise, it grows, it blooms with no deadheading, no maintenance really, except for that. Full sun, partial shade. You could even put it in full shade, but you may not see as many flowers. So just remember that. Anything that you're planting that you want to see a lot of flowers on, in most cases, those plants are going to need more sun. But if you can only give them morning sun, that is the best sun for almost any plant. This is cranesbill geranium. I'm going to show you two different geraniums. These are perennial geraniums that are hardy. Again, we're looking at this -10, -20. That's kind of my focus because I want to recommend plants to you that are not only pretty, durable, preferably low maintenance, but hardy, so that you can live in an area where it does get to -20, or you can live where it never gets below 10, and these plants would grow fine. Now, if you live in an area where it never gets below 30, but you get highs that are regularly above 110, many of these plants might not work ideally for you because it may just be too hot. But the geraniums, they die completely to the ground in winter, and then they come back in full force. So the only thing you're doing is cleaning them up in the fall. And again, I'm saying fall. Some people will leave things until the spring, but we're trying to be fire aware here, which means you don't leave your dead leaf litter to sit there all winter long. So we're cleaning these plants up. Your height on this is about 18 inches. There are other types of geraniums out there that will get taller than that. There are other geraniums out there that are actually considered shrubs. So you want to look at either the labels as far as the descriptions, or this is where truly we go into scientific names to make sure if you're ordering one, you get exactly what you're looking for, because geranium is a common name. This is Bicova, or it could be said differently. Some people call this an apple geranium. It's a scented geranium, but again, it's an extremely hardy geranium. I have this one. It actually grows in almost full shade, and it still blooms for me. It gets a little bit of filtered sunlight. The picture where you can see the lawn is a friend of mine's yard, and I wanted to just show you how it was spreading out. Single plant in a 1-gallon container, maybe a foot wide, will easily get over 4 feet wide as it acclimates to your environment. So a plant starts off small and then they get larger. As long as you're taking care of them, sometimes they can more than quadruple their size in one season. So don't be afraid to buy those little 4-inch plants. You don't have to buy the 1 gallon. They will acclimate to your garden. Plumbago. Plumbago is one of my favorites. It's been around for decades. But ironically, the only place I used to really be able to find this is more up in the Lake Tahoe Basin, because it became a very popular up there because it gave people this beautiful green ground cover staying below 2 feet. Mine stays right about at a foot tall, blooms these great bluish purple flowers. But then in fall, like that first plant I showed you when we started looking at perennials, this does the intense red all over the leaves. And it lasts for weeks. It's just gorgeous. It does thrive a little bit more when it's given some partial shade and a little bit more moisture, but it's a very tolerant of many different soil types. So that's great. But you get the best of all the worlds. You get something that spreads, you get beautiful color, you get beautiful flowers, and then you get this fall color. And then it completely dies back in the fall. So really cleanup, you don't even have to do much on the cleanup of this. It just kind of decomposes. So that's very nice, makes it easy for you. This one's unique. This is Ironweed, and you can see there's a geranium in front of it. I wanted to show you something that maybe you haven't seen. Ironweed, this is silver ironweed. It is a perennial. It dies back completely to the ground in the fall, but it's got this beautiful, intense gray silver. The nice thing about this is a low water use plant. Any kind of gray foliage normally reflects light. It will bloom with partial shade or full sun and just gets covered with these gorgeous, intense, deep purple to magenta flowers. The bees love this plant. It's also, if you're doing dried floral arrangements, we actually had people go and ask if they could cut this plant in the fall to use for arrangements, which made it really easy because we didn't have to prune it back. Everybody wanted the flower stalks. This one is not as hardy. It's 0 to about -10, but it is something very different. And I wanted to show you because you might not see it at your local nurseries, but it is available. Jupiter's beard. Many of you may know this one. It's called red Valerian Centranthus. There's also a white, but I'm going to highlight the pink here because it is just a stronger plant. It can handle multiple different locations. Again, this one dies back to the ground. The heights on it, though, if it's happy where it is, it can easily get to 4 feet tall when it flowers. One plant, 3 by 4 feet, no problem. The white, I haven't seen it with that kind of hardiness, but the pink does really well. The neat thing is you can buy this plant already growing. You can also buy it from seed and start it in your house and then put it out. Sometimes people have put it in wildflower mixes, but I wouldn't suggest that. It really does very well when it's kind of put out on its own or you use it as a border. Not much dry material here, except in the fall when it completely dies back, and then you just prune it down to the ground and it'll come back every year for you. Again, a lot of butterflies love this, pollinators love it, and it blooms all summer long without any deadheading. So that's another key. Jamie found a new favorite on a plant. So this is silver-edged horehound. Now, if we've got anybody from Northern California or more Eastern Nevada, or you've ever had horehound gum, you're sitting here going, are you serious? Horehound is a native in Nevada, but this is a cultivar. And in Nevada, Northern California, I even think parts of Idaho, it's actually considered a weed, even though it's a native wildflower. But this is a cultivar that is grown to be smaller. So it only gets about 10 inches tall. And then it's going to spread out 2 to 4 feet. This one you're going to have to look for. It's not going to be at your box store readily available. But if you're doing areas where you've got rock or a hot environment, here's something that gives you really cool texture. You're not buying this for the flower. You're buying it for its form. It is going to try to be somewhat evergreen, but if the environment is colder, then it's probably going to die to the ground and then grow back when springtime comes. But beautiful plant for just adding that accent, a little bit of diversity, a feel. You almost can touch it. And yes, it is an herb. So if you pinch those leaves, you are going to get that minty scent to it. But as I said, its parent is the one that they make horehound gum out of. I don't know if you can find that anymore. Penstemons. This one, I'm just showing you electric blue. I'm going to show you a couple penstemons. Throughout the Great Basin area, we have native penstemons, but they have been working on penstemons a lot, and there are tons of cultivars that have become more adaptable for the home landscape. Flowering colors are pretty much blues, purples, pinks, reds, yellows. You just have to look at the environment. Some cultivars are better than others. Some attract more aphid, I've found. So you have to pick what's best for you and your landscape. This electric blue is really nice. Very few insects. Again, it can handle full sun or partial shade. This one will get up to about 24 inches. So you do have to look at where you're placing it. They don't need high moisture and they don't need high organic matter either. This is yellow pine leaf. It's also called bearded tongue. There's also a red. Now this one is unique. I have this. I also have the red. Now this is different in the penstemon, and In most cases, I would tell you Penstemons, you could grow closer to the home because they have high water content. They don't have a woody nature. That is not the case of the pine leaf. The pine leaf is very hardy, -10 again, -20, but it will be pretty much a year-round evergreen, and it does get woody. So you want to keep further away. But this is going to give you texture. It only is going to be blooming in your summer months. But then throughout the rest of the season, you're going to have this very thin leaf green that's almost going to look like a pine evergreen, and that's why they call it pine leaf, but it is considered still a herbaceous perennial. I would not suggest pruning this one to the ground unless you're just going to experiment with one, because in most cases, they're still going to photosynthesize and they're still storing energy throughout the entire winter months. If they do brown out on you, then prune them back and they should come back from the root system. But remember, depending on where you live, your plants can go through a winter drought the same way they can go through a summer drought. So if you don't get moisture or snow cover, it's always beneficial to give moisture to your plants, especially if they're newly planted, at least once a month. Drag the hose out. This is Zostinaria, something that's very similar. Popularity has gone through the roof on this one. It's also called California fuchsia, very similar to that pine leaf penstemon in its behavior. Blooming is in the summer, very fine needle-like leaves. But again, this one's going to leave you a form in the winter. So does very well in rocky, hot areas, doesn't get too tall. They're starting to use it more and more in commercial landscapes. So anytime a plant gets used in a commercial landscape, that means that plant can handle a lot of abuse. Otherwise, they wouldn't be putting it in the specs. So that's something to kind of consider. Now, this is Texas yucca, also Hespelora. Many people call it by different names. This one is not the -20 hardiness, but the popularity is going through the roof, and they are wonderful choices. Very low maintenance. Generally in our drier environments, they don't get big and lush like you see in the bottom picture. That is actually at a botanical garden, so they have a lot nicer soils than most of us are dealing with. But you can see in the upper two, dry environments, DG, rock areas, they come out with beautiful flower spikes. They will multiply as far as getting larger. It's a clumping activity, and then you can later on divide them, basically cut them in half and make 2 plants out of them, or plant them in clumps. Again, this is more for a dry environment, but it's a low maintenance plant. They will give you that evergreen look. Don't plant them too close to walkways. If you have children or dogs, you want to be very careful about where you place them, because they are very similar to an ornamental grass in that knife-like leaf structure. And it's normally the children and our puppies that end up running past them and getting cut, since adults are much taller. Now you might be wondering, why am I putting azalea in here? Well, the thing is, azaleas are very tough. Now, they are much more suited for areas that have a lower pH. They prefer a pH that's below 7, preferably 5.5 to 6.5. That means you're acidic, but they will grow in neutral soils. So while I have a pH of about 7.1, I can grow azaleas without really doing modifications to my soil. The great thing about the azaleas, what I want to tell you about, is in the environment we're looking at, this is a plant that is not densely woody as far as its structure. When you look up most azaleas, you're going to see this plant that's just covered with flowers and there's leaves and everything. No, not for us. The hardy azaleas like the Northern Lights, which they're hardy to -30 to -40. They will bloom with pretty much no leaves, and then they'll come out with your leaf color. So this is going to bloom in spring. You'll get great splashes of color, and then you'll just have a green shrub. But the nice thing is low maintenance. You don't have to do too much pruning except for size. There's all different variations, but again, you want to pay attention to how hardy they are. The Northern Lights series was, I believe, created at the University of Minnesota. But they're coming out with more and more that are hardy to the -20, -30. If you have soil pHs where you're above 8, or you've got that white crust on top of your soil, this plant's going to struggle a little bit, but you can amend the soil. I would suggest keeping these more on the north or the east side of the house. Don't put them in a really hot environment. You treat them the exact same way you could do a rhododendron. And they are good plant choices too, but again, they like more acidic. They're a little more temperamental, but again, keep them on the east or the north side of the house. Skunk bush sumac. I'm watching my time. Okay, I'm going to kind of hustle here because I know we don't have a ton of time. This is a wonderful plant. It's a recommended plant in most of your plant lists. One of the things that you have to consider, this is fall. This is when it's starting to change. It does this incredible intense red. It's green in the growing season. And one of the things is if you can put it in a place where you don't prune it until after it's flowered in the spring. I never knew it, but this plant has so many beneficial insects that come to it early in the season. We're not just talking honeybees, we're talking bumblebees, hoverflies, beneficial wasps, all kinds of critters were all over these things. But one thing you have to take note of is this is one that you're going to find on lists that's recommended. But if you don't clean up the leaf litter, this plant drops all those leaves. And the way it grows, it starts to accumulate. So it's just like that juniper I showed you. You will start getting dense layers of leaves that don't decompose as well as they should. So you really want to make sure that you're making a habit of cleaning these out. Otherwise, beautiful shrub, spreads well as far as it gets larger, easily maintained as far as you can hedge prune this baby, and tolerates almost any soil. Spirea. You've probably seen these. They're all over. You'll find them at the box stores. They come in all different types of colors and sizes and shapes. Wildlife loves them, but one of the things I want to make sure you're aware of is while Spirea is great, and you can get many of them to rebloom if you deadhead them, this is highly woody. So don't plant it too close to the home. A lot of people do because it's got this, some of them are very compact, but there are a ton of small twigs here and they become very dense. And it's not that they collect leaf litter. It's just that this becomes almost, it starts to look like a hairbrush. That's how many stems are in there that are pretty dry throughout the winter season. So it's best if you keep them further away from the home. And like I said, there's a lot of different varieties out there. Ones that will stay under 2 feet and compact, to bridal wreath, which will get up to 8 feet tall. And bridal wreath only blooms once, so you want to prune it at the right time. But Anthony Water is one that gets to 4 feet, and it's a repeat bloomer if you prune off the dead flowers. Wonderful diversity, very tough. You'll see them all over. Just be patient to find the one that you really like. Almost all of them do a pink to white flower. But as you can see, the leaf color is what they've really been working on, and the size. Red twig dogwood. I'm a huge fan of the dogwoods. They've come out with a lot of different cultivars. They're one of those plants that's a wonderful choice for most landscapes. They're native, but as I said, they've come out with cultivars. Most people are buying this plant truly for its winter interest. So maintaining it is important. You don't really want to hedge cut these if you want that winter interest. They do better in areas that have a little bit more moisture, but they will grow in areas that don't have very much. The plant itself will get up to 10 feet tall. It blooms a white flower and it has a very dark green leaf. So if you're looking for a barrier between you and a neighbor, great plant. Because even in the winter, you've got this barrier, but that's when it's really, really pretty. There are varieties there's a yellow twig dogwood. They've also come out with varieties that are more of a yellow red, so they call it an orange or a flame red. So pay attention to the labels depending on what you're looking for, so it matches what you want for your environment. All right, watching. We're almost done with shrubs, so I'm going to try to show you a couple of the trees. Apache plume is a native. Now, this is one that I would always encourage you, keep this far away from the house. While it does have a low flammability as far as it being a native and the leaves and the moisture content, when it flowers, there's more flammability there because it's very fluffy and airy. But what I wanted to show you in this picture is what they planted underneath it to keep any leaf litter down. This is where they used a succulent, and it looks really wonderful. But again, good plant placement. Apache plume is extremely tough. I'm seeing it in more commercial landscapes where they hedge cut it and the plant just survives. So here's a native that's being abused, but it's resilient. So if you put it in a really difficult location, you can maintain it in a very nice way and have an attractive plant, but keep it further away from the house. Butterfly bush. This one's a big one. Been around for decades, but there are new varieties that are lower, and then there's the standard varieties that have the potential to get to 10 feet. What I wanted to tell you about butterfly bush is it does bloom in different colors. You've got pinks, purples, whites. The yellow is very different. It's a honeycomb style. But with butterfly bush, the standard practice has been to tell you to prune it down to like the 2-foot mark, either in the fall or spring. And what I want to encourage you to think of is with this plant, when you do that, it becomes very dense and it becomes extremely woody and massive. But butterfly bush can be pruned to have more of an airy feature to it. And then you're not pruning it back so harshly, and it doesn't come back with such full force. You're still going to get beautiful blooms, but if you prune it for structure and openness, this plant can be used in many different areas of the landscape and will have less of a flammable potential because it's more open, if that makes sense. You don't want it looking dense and crowded with tons of dead branches or dormant branches.
Hey, Wendy, I think that we probably need to go to some Q&A and some post evaluation or post workshop questions.
I told you I'd never get through this. I was like, I can't.
I know. I was thinking, geez, this is such great information. I don't want to stop her, but it is advertised till 7:30. So I'm going to actually share the last poll and then go to some questions. So if folks can just, I won't share.
Stop sharing?
Oh, can you see the poll?
I can see the poll.
Oh yeah, don't stop sharing. You're okay. We're going to keep the we'll keep this up, and let me ask some questions that I have emailed to me. Let's see. There's a question. Most urban and suburban homes don't have 100 feet from the house. My yard would fall within the zone 1, but for water conservation reasons, I would prefer not to have lawn and high water use plants. How do you balance water conservation and Firewise design?
Okay, so most people are going to immediately assume that I'm going to recommend rock, but that's definitely not the case. You can do beautiful landscape designs being water conscious and fire conscious by doing low ground covers. To cover the ground, it'll keep it cooler. It'll reduce how much moisture you use. Definitely looking at bulbs, just because bulbs are and they're very reasonable. Then looking at different perennials. There's, like I said, I showed you sedums and different perennials that are out there, but there's thousands, honestly. So what you want to do is you want to look at your exposure, as far as if you're a southern exposure, if your front yard faces north, then that's going to modify how you do things. The other thing is you don't have to do a typical turf grass. But one of the things you want to consider is if you do try to incorporate trees, Jamie asked me to put trees in here, and I'm like, I don't know if I'll ever get to them. So you will see trees when you look at this video later. If you do a tree, you can do a small tree. And then what you want to do is you want to put ground covers around it. So that way you don't have to put a flammable mulch that may be like we compost or shredded barks or things like that might ignite. You can put a living mulch down. That also spreads out your water and reduces how frequently you have to water. But there are so many options, but it's a matter of looking at a style you like, looking at the exposure, looking at how much time you want to put into it. I don't recommend rock very much because rock takes a lot of work and you still grow weeds in rocks. We live in an environment with wind and dirt. So it flies and it settles, and then weeds grow right on top of the weed block. But there's lots of options.
Another question is, and I'll take this one. It's for pine needle pickup. How often do you recommend raking up? So we actually have a fire adapted communities, the next step in wildfire preparedness for the Lake Tahoe Basin. And in those recommendations, we recommend routinely removing the pine needles that accumulate right next to the home. So the 0 to 5 foot range, it's really critical to remove those pine needles. Then the recommendation is from 5 feet to 30 feet, removing every spring. And then from 30 feet, more than 30 feet from your home, maintain that the pine needles at less than 3 inches. I think those are still the recommendations. We are actually reevaluating our defensible space recommendations with local agencies. So those are currently the recommendations in our publication. And so that would be there. If you want to learn more, you can go to tahoelivingwithfire.com to read up on that. Let me pull up the next question, and it would be, I recommend routine maintenance all through the, sorry. That was not a question. That was a response. Can you mention whether the plants you suggest are deer, bunny, or vole resistant?
Oh, I love that. Thank you for not throwing in wild horse. That makes it harder. Okay. Many of the plants that I listed would be. Now, okay. I can't go off the top of my head and tell you which ones definitely aren't. So in most cases, when it comes to jackrabbits or cottontails, they're always going to try something before they decide they don't like it. So if it's new, they're going to taste it. At that point, that's where I always recommend, and they really do work. You can put some of the taste deterrents down on them. But the vast majority of what I told you, let's see. The rabbits aren't gonna bother. Deer, in most cases, I'm trying to think of everything I listed. Most of them, it would take me a little time, but I might be able, if they give me a little time to modify this presentation, I might be able to put some of that on there on some of those plants. But there are plant lists. They won't be fire aware, but there are plants lists that will be labeled as deer resistant. There's not a lot of rabbit resistant ones. Typically, rabbits will leave things alone that are hairy or have high oil content. On the same note, I've watched a rabbit eat an onion. So, yeah, I was not happy.
Do squirrels eat irises?
No, that's a great thing. but squirrels will steal hens and chicks sometimes.
Hmm.
So you have to be aware of the location. They don't bother my Delospermas. They don't bother my Sedums, but sometimes when they get desperate, they'll steal the hens and chicks. And I've also seen rabbits in the winter actually go and eat the hens and chicks. But the nice thing is they're so tough, they just come right back in the spring.
There's a comment, leaves get trapped under St. Johnswort.
Yes, they do.
Yeah, so just be sure to clean up that dead vegetation, those dead leaves. I have a few other questions. Where do you get silver-edged horehound? I would love to know that question because I really want that plant in my landscape.
Okay, that one, let's see if I can tell you right off the top. I think I know off the top of my head, but I'm gonna double check. So ask me the next question and I'll look it up while you ask the next one.
You might need to look up this one too. Where do you get pine leaf beard tongue?
Oh, that one's actually easy. And not that I'm really allowed to recommend, but I got that at a box store. So you actually will find the pine leaf penstemon, which is ironic, not only at your nurseries, but I found them at Lowe's and Home Depot sometimes. So the only thing is, I'll tell you, whenever you go to what I call a box store, is their plant material that comes in is all done by a mass buyer. So you never know what's going to come in. And like the pine leaf that I purchased, nobody was buying them because they weren't in bloom. So I'll be honest, I bought them at Lowe's. I got them on clearance. But you can find them. One of the places that I will say, as you said, with Extension, we're not allowed to promote one or another. But if you're looking for a catalog that can almost be used as a resource manual, High Country Gardens is excellent for people who live in the Great Basin and are looking for tough plants. And they give great descriptions, and they also tell you if plants are rabbit or deer resistant or they're pollinator plants. So it's just a great resource. They sell out very quickly. But that's what I'm trying to get into right now because I think they have that horehound, but it's taking a little time. So what's the next one?
Oh, this is a new question. What is the maximum depth of bark mulch? Knowing bark mulch is not a recommended cover. I know it's better to remove it, but a homeowner insists on keeping it. Oof, I don't. I mean, how far is this mulch from the house? Again, it shouldn't be within the first 5 feet of the home. We do say to folks that if you prefer to have some sort of mulch within the 5 to 30, using it sparingly is okay, but not widespread. So I don't think there is a maximum or minimum depth of bark mulch. That's how I would answer that one.
Yeah, it's one of those. Okay. To go back to the horehound, I will tell you. So the silver-edged horehound, the site I told you, High Country Gardens, does have that plant. And that's the one. Otherwise, I think you're going to have to search for it. But to give you an idea, it's only a 5-inch pot, so it's not a big one. But it's on sale for $9.89. But then
Great.
they will also give you ideas. It's a catalog that I love to have because it gives me inspiration for different plants. Because I live in a very hard environment now, in soil that is very challenging. So it's always good to see new inspirations, and they focus on tough plants.
Okay. So we are nearing the end. We did the post workshop presentation, post workshop polls, and I think that if if folks want this presentation again, we will end up having a recording of this, and we will send it into the email to you, as well as the PowerPoint. If there's no other questions, I think we're good.
What I'm going to do, Jamie, is I'm going to take, hi, everybody. I'm going to take this to the last slide. If anyone has further questions about plant material, feel free to email me. Just give me a little time to get back to you. If you don't hear from me, send me another one. I answer questions for all of Northern Nevada, which essentially is the entire state except for Clark County. And I can provide, doesn't matter if you don't live in Nevada, go ahead and email me and I can answer any plant questions that I may be able to. And like Jamie said, the presentation will there, and then you'll have the slides, so you'll get to see the other plants that I mentioned. You just won't have the commentary, but you can always email me with further questions on them.
A copy of the PowerPoint. Yep, you will get a copy of the PowerPoint. And thank you so much, Wendy. Christina and I were just messaging each other saying, I feel inspired.
There's so much you can do. And I knew, I was like going, I'll never make it through this presentation in 45 minutes. Even cutting out things, there's so many plants that people can do. And sometimes it's just telling you about old ones that can be rejuvenated. And then there's new ones that people haven't seen, because you don't always get nursery owners that want to bring in a lot of new things, or you just don't have that availability around you. So you want to know what will work and not waste your money.
Well, thank you so much. Your knowledge is incredible and always appreciated. And thank you for presenting. Thank you everybody for attending. This is the first of our series. We do have others in our series. Again, we're going to have 1 to 2 presentations every month from April through October. So just keep your eyes peeled for these different presentations. We're going to have it on smoke and wildfire, fire behavior, wildfire preparedness. We're going to talk about a fire that was investigated. We got a lot of cool stuff in store. So thanks, everyone.
Have a wonderful night, everybody.
You too.